Hey, there we go. We are live. We're live. Hey. Um. Okay. What were you saying, Mom?
Freeze my pain while you're on.
Okay. That is a very terrible way to start. Me, not you. Um. But anyway. So we're back. We've been gone for a long time. All right. We're talking about the Sunday readings for this Sunday, and you, Jacob, said that the first reading was really harsh. So if you want, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it's just amazing because like the reading is just sitting there talking about like don't you dare treat people like this, or this, or I will do this, and this to you, and it will hurt, and it will and it will be with a sword, and it's just very, very, very clear like bad things are done, bad things will happen to you, and I just thought it was really funny the difference between that and Jesus's the gospel reading where he's like, obviously the main commandment is, um,
Love
sorry,
one
yeah,
another.
love one another, and then second to it is love thy neighbor like you love yourself, and
Love God, love your neighbor like yourself.
yeah, and it's just like very clear that that's like obviously, but it's like a completely different way of saying the same thing, and shows the real differences between the Old Testament and the New. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah. Uh, I uh, I I kind of enjoyed it. Like I mean, they were pretty straightforward readings.
Yeah.
We've all read them, but for anybody who hasn't read them, the first one is from Exodus, and it's just basically saying, like they were saying, treat 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 the alien, treat the foreigner kindly. Watch out how you treat widows and orphans, and if you don't watch out how you treat them, I will smite you. Basically, is what it's saying. Um, and then the second reading is with Paul kind of encouraging the people that he's gone to talk to and saying, look, you guys have been doing a really great job, and everywhere that your faith has spread, people have turned around, and you yourselves turned from being idol worshippers to following the and so kind of like through the love that you have shown, and the faith that you have shown, it's really kind of communicated and touched people. That's kind of what I got of it, just as like a straightforward interpretation of it. And then the gospel is basically where uh, Pharisees are trying to trip up Jesus, and they ask him which one's the most important commandment, or yeah, which one's the greatest commandment? And he says, "You shall love God with all your heart, soul, and mind." And the second is that you should love your neighbor. So he doesn't really answer him, except to say they're all important, and this is what they distill down to love God and love your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the straightforward. It wasn't really hard to kind of find a connection. All of it's about love. All of it's about treating people kindly, treating people with compassion, especially the least of God's people, the people in a strange land, widows and orphans. Um, and I guess the thing that kind of hit me a little bit as I was reading it and as I was kind of just looking at stuff. Um, Actually, in the second reading, and real quick before we touch on that, my mom brought up a really good point, last week when she talked about how the responsorial psalm also fits into the theme of the readings and is an important thing to look at. So we'll probably start looking at that. And basically, the responsorial psalm is Psalm 18, and it's just basically, I love you, Lord, my strength. So two things: I love you, and then recognizing that God's the source of our strength. God is the thing that through which we have any strength at all, really. So all of those are about love and how you treat people. The thing that stuck with me, and then we can kind of go with how you guys feel about them, is that in the second reading, at the very end of it, Paul says, um, uh, they themselves, these people that he's talking about, openly declare about us what sort of reception we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols, to serve the living and true God, and to await his Son from heaven, who raised from the dead, Jesus who delivers us from the coming wrath. And that really kind of stuck with me. And what kind of stuck with me was that I remember hearing at some point that the Jews are a people who are waiting. Like the Jews are a people who are constantly waiting for their Messiah. I don't remember where I heard that from, but it kind of stuck with it's stuck with me since I've heard it. And they're living in this anticipation of the coming Messiah, right? And we as Christians believe that the Messiah came and that um, and that we're following him. And so, but as I was thinking about that, I was thinking that like we're also, we're still waiting too. Like we can easily be a people who are waiting as well for the second coming, for things to get better, for heaven to come on earth. And if we're only waiting in this life, that and this is kind of like my own meditation on these readings. If we're only waiting, like we're doing, it can be a kind of sad thing because we're waiting for something that I think God is telling us to do right now, and to be a part of, not to wait for God to come, but to really bring God and bring Christ to other people. And so once I started kind of thinking about that, I read the first reading again, and thinking about, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I bring God? And and basically kind of, I guess the Holy Spirit talking to me through those readings, saying, well, do this. It's not really a theological exercise. It's more of a physical action exercise of be loving, be compassionate towards these people. Forget about memorizing rules and numbers and prescriptions, and just know that, like, love God, love your neighbor, and they work together. It's not very hard to do. I was in a bookstore the other day, and I read one of those things that you hang on your door, like one of those. I don't know. They're really pretty. They're like artistic, and they have a nice quote. And basically, it was the Dalai Lama saying something like they have a need for a temple or a religion. My temple is my heart, and my religion is kindness. And obviously, I mean, that's the simplification of things, but essentially that seems like the right idea, And we do the rituals that we do in order to kind of keep our heart pure, keep our mind on what's good. But at the end of the day, it comes down to not just am I being a good person, but am I really trying to follow like what Christ did? Am I trying to follow what Jesus did when he was on earth? And in that way, being the best example of Jesus that I can be to others. That was kind of I have a couple of other thoughts about it, but that was kind of my take and my meditation on the readings. How did it strike you, or what are your thoughts?
Am I going first? Okay, I can go first. I already went first, but no. Okay, so I already told you the first thing I thought of. I thought it was pretty amazing.
Sorry, she's playing with blocks.
Yeah, she's. I thought it was pretty amazing that Paul specifically said, that he will save us from the coming wrath, because it just completely, solidifies that, the Jewish people never stopped waiting even after they became believers in Christ. I completely agree with you in that. And it's interesting because there's like two different things that kind of like differentiate us between Protestant Christians. And one of them is, like really that works, or something that we have to do as Christians. And the other is kind of like the second coming of Christ. What we as Catholics don't necessarily believe, there's going to be
a rapture?
Yeah, rapture, and that second coming of Christ, being pulled out of an evil and destroyed world, and kind of strange because like all three of these kind of speak to both of those points, because it's definitely said that you need to lead by example, you need to do these things. It's not said works, but I mean it said Paul's praising them because the way you've behaved, the way you've shown Christ's love, it's definitely preceded us arriving, and it's allowed these people to embrace Christ before we even got there. And Christ is saying, love thyself, love thy neighbor, the number one commandments. I thought it was amazing too about them testing Christ. Every time I read them, I'm just like, God, okay, all right, have fun with that. But they were very familiar, right? The apostles and Christ, and I think they had their doubts.
The Pharisees?
Even after, the Pharisees. But didn't it say it was one of the apostles who was more versed, not a Pharisee, who asked Jesus that? I don't know. Anyways, I think they're really interesting readings because Yeah, for those reasons. I think it very much says you have to lead by example and you have to follow Christ's example, and those who do will be rewarded. And they're rewarded by the very nature of following the example.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Do you think uh, and I would definitely want to get to you, Mom. But real quick, you mentioned testing Christ and kind of like how that constantly seems to come up in the Gospels. Uh, uh, do you guys think that you still test like God?
Oh, all the time. like, yeah, I remember when I was reading it, it would be like, well, if you're real, well, you would do this. I mean, if you're real, why don't you just fix this? Stuff like that. It's definitely something that I did way more before. Definitely. But it's in the
I don't know
small
about
stuff.
testing. I definitely question things. But I mean, I think that's part of everybody's faith journey to question, like, why is this the way it is? Why do we believe these things? Or I don't agree with the church policy on this, or I don't agree with the church, like, dogma stuff and, stuff like that. But I don't know about testing.
I'm not sure how not being there with Christ, how you could test in the way that he tested Christ.
Yeah.
Where he was like, which is the best commandment? And obviously the thing that they're expecting is, oh, all the commandments are equally important. There is no better commandment. Or they were hoping even better for him to say, like, oh, thou shalt not kill, or something like that. Something that's not necessarily...
As long as you never kill anyone ever, you're going to heaven.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure they were hoping for a different reaction. But I'm not sure how you would test Christ in that way.
I think people slash I'll just speak for myself. Like I think I could definitely think of times if I really thought hard about it. Not that I probably really need to think too hard about it, but think of times that I've probably like tested God in the exact same way. Not so much with a question specifically to Him, but like with like a justification for certain actions that I do, and saying, well, that wasn't like one of the really important commandments, so that's okay, like, and just being like, and so in that way, kind of having this subtle conversation of, that's not really important, right? Like I can get away with that, right? Like I'm still good, that kind of thing. I definitely know that I do that to whatever extent, but I think that's my version of testing God when that happens.
Well, I want to hear what your mom has to say. Because she's always super quiet and patient with all of us talking.
I think you all have basically said most of what I was thinking already. The only thing I was thinking when Jacob said that Exodus, the excerpt from Exodus is really harsh, my mind immediately raced over to Matthew 25, when Jesus is saying, you saw me poor and you saw me sick and you didn't feed me, you didn't help me, you didn't visit me in jail, you didn't clothe me when I was naked, and therefore you will not be with me in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
That's not sugarcoating anything. That is just as harsh.
Yeah.
Except for Exodus has the revenge. I will make your wives widows. I will make your children orphans.
Yeah.
But we human beings need that an awful lot. I mean, just look at what our politicians today are doing to our immigrants.
True.
That's exactly what they're doing. And there's no way you can misread or misinterpret Exodus 22, 20 to 26. You just can't read it any other way.
Yeah.
No.
What are you doing?
Well, and I agree. It's pretty explicit in what it's saying. I was thinking about so one thing like important to keep in mind as well. Like there's an evolution going on, right? There's the evolution of human spirituality and human reflection, self-reflection, just within humanity as a whole, and so this doesn't go against what anybody said so far. I think this is just like kind of my thoughts on it. Like you read something in anything in Exodus that kind of attaches to anything in the New Testament. Often it has to do with like the Old Testament version will be like super explicit, super tangible, super concrete, and the New Testament version is often a little more abstract. And just the way, like, when you're training a child, when they're young, you got to be like, no, you do not touch fire, or I will spank you, or whatever. And then when they're older, it's more like positive feedback. It's like, try to do this, positive encouragement, positive directive. Um, so that's like an important like thought, I think. And also, like, I think it's interesting how it's worded, right? Like, my wrath will flare up and I will kill you with the sword. It doesn't sound like a very, like, this is one of the things I try to every now and then I try to like hear from like the atheist point of view or the agnostic point of view, the cynic's point of view, just to kind of see what like, because I don't want to write them off, you know. I don't want to write them off as, well, they're just horrible people, which I don't think they are at all. I really want to try to understand their point of view and just to kind of understand the people around me and the people that I associate with, some of who are atheists, right? And I think bar none, the biggest complaint or the biggest criticism of Christianity in general is that we like love and we serve and we honor and we praise this God who we attribute all these horrible attributes to, like, I will end you, I will, you know, these things that don't seem very loving, especially in the Old Testament. And I was thinking about it. How can that make sense? How can I make sense of that with what I think that I know about God? And I don't know if this is just kind of like my own kind of rationalization of it, but it seems that, you know, you look at people that really go off the deep end, like really are in prison for multiple, or in prison for crimes against humanity, or all this kind of stuff. And so many of them like go insane. So many of them like are just like completely full of anger. And I don't know enough to know whether that anger is what fueled their drive to just hurt people, or if hurting people kind of fueled their anger, or if it's just like this weird cycle that, you know, there's not really a beginning to it. But it seems to me that that could be an equally valid way of understanding, you know, anybody who wrongs them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry. My wrath will flare up and I will kill you with the sword. You know, God isn't something, I don't think God is something that's really like necessarily outside of us. I think, you know, we believe that as Catholics, as Christians, God is within us, the Holy Spirit is within us, and if we violate that, whether through our conscience or through our actions or whatever, then we're essentially turning our back on God, and when we turn our back on the thing that gives us life, then we're left with death, and essentially we bring the sword upon ourselves. And so it's like an interesting way of, I don't know, I think I don't know, that's my kind of like holistic, integral God and me, and how that's way. I mean, that's my thought on that.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense to me. My best friend in the world is an atheist, and we've been friends since high school. So she's like my sister practically, and she's a fantastic human being. Like, just one of those truly good people, like really loving people, really like one of the most Christian people I know, which is funny because she's an atheist. But she were having a discussion about exactly this a couple of days ago, and I told her kind of a similar thing that I was thinking about it. Like, she was like, well, you know, if you read the dichotomy between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you know, a lot of Christians today act like the Old Testament doesn't exist, but if the Bible is this holy book, then the Old Testament has to be brought into consideration. And I kind of agree, like, with what you've been saying this whole time. Like, the Old Testament, well, what I ended up telling her was that the Old Testament is just as important as the New Testament, but it was written, obviously, at a different time of history for a completely different audience. And you know, it's ancient text. And so the culture back then was completely different, obviously. And the human presence of God, like the presence of God in human lives, was taken as matter of fact. It wasn't like now how people think it's like this iffy thing, like, well, if God is here, or, you know, how people say God is omnipresent and omniscient and, you know, and all powerful, but a lot of people say that, but they don't really think about God sitting with them at the table, you know. And when the Old Testament was written, people did think about God sitting with them at the table as they ate dinner, and God was present in every moment of their lives in a way that isn't as common now, you know. And so I think that, yeah, I think you saying, like, I will punish you with the sword and your children will be orphans and, whatever, I think that parallel that you drew to putting someone in prison because they've hurt a lot of people, or that parallel you drew to, you know, um, a man's actions causing him to be divorced from his family and lose custody of his children, and like a lot of situations like that that are common in modern society, we could say that God is acting through us and through humanity and through the things that He's put into motion to have that. Sorry, I'm using this very forcefully about this. But yeah, I agree with you, Nathan.
I really agree with what you said about like when the kid is young and you have to be like, don't touch that fire, it will burn you. Like sometimes you have to be just short and to the point. If you do this, this will happen, and it is how it is. And the kid gets upset usually, and then it passes, and hopefully you really got your point across. I think the Bible is not a book out of time. It's a book with very specific time and a very specific audience. The Old Testament was definitely speaking to God's people in a way to move them in God's direction, in order to move in the world until the time that God could reword and explain things.
The new covenant with Jesus Christ.
Exactly. And it's definitely important. I think it's still historically important. I think it's crucial that we understand where we came from, that we understand our Jewish roots. It's important that we understand God moving in history until the point where we were ready to join Him. But I don't think that it's not a different message. Really, it's just two sides of the same coin. And that's the way the Catholic Church frames it in all these readings. It's always two sides of the same coin, isn't it? Even if sometimes the coin's thicker and sometimes it's thinner, you get to that other side and you're like, oh, it's kind of saying the same thing. It's the dark to the light, So, I completely agree.
Well, it makes sense. Yeah, just seeing the Bible as seeing the Bible in history the way it is, and that's definitely one of the ways that we're supposed to read it. Well, I think the first way that we're supposed to read it is not correct, and then go on to read it as, okay, well, now that I understand it in history, how does it apply to my life? Casey had a thought that she wanted to share as well.
So I think it's an important thing you're talking about with like the difference between the Old and New Testament. I know this isn't the point of the talk, but it kind of went along with what you're saying with Jacob and Sophie. That like the Old Testament was based on the covenant with. Can you hear me?
Can you start all over? I don't know why, but the sound on my end is really garbled. I can't understand a word you're saying.
Me too.
Okay.
Maybe if
so the old.
Maybe if Nathan mutes the rest of us, because if there's noise that either Sophie's making or I'm making, I think it's affecting yours.
Yours.
Yeah, how about you mute yours and you can take it back off, Mom.
Okay.
So what I wanted to say was, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
I wanted to talk about another difference between the Old and the New Testament. How the Old Testament was a covenant based on Adam and Eve in the garden. So God placed them there, saying, "Here, you guys can live here. Just don't eat from this fruit of the tree." So that's what the entire Old Testament, that covenant that got broken, that's what that's based on. But the New Testament is based on the new covenant with Jesus, like Jesus being the sacrificial lamb, and He took away all that. So I think that's kind of an important difference, not to discount what was said in the Old Testament, but just in a way to see how it was based on an entirely different understanding, and now the New Testament is based on something different. So.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And you guys, I don't know if you're trying to say something or not, but
No.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you for that. I agree, definitely.
And did you? I have so what I want to do is say one more thought I have about that, and then I want to go around and if you guys are cool with it, I was thinking it might be a nice thing for each of us to say like if we were to summarize the essence for us individually of like the readings, then we can go around and kind of share that. And this is not something necessarily for us to like necessarily agree on, although if we do, that's cool. But just as like a way to kind of like end it. But before we do that, did you have something to say, Mom?
Well, I was just going to jump a little bit on what Casey and I think it was Jacob was saying about the Old Testament.
Sure.
When we talk about the history of the Old Testament and we try to put things in context, then we start to realize that everything that we now think of as harsh, back in that day was much softer than what the cultures around them were doing. So they were, it was always like you mentioned before, it was part of that evolution of going from one stage to another to another to another. And way back then, widows could have starved, orphans could have starved. They didn't care. That was not part of that culture. Today, there are still cultures in the world where that is exactly the case. Children who have no parents can become slaves, or they die. Women who lose their husbands or who are divorced or who leave the husband are cast out because they are used and they are dirt. That still happens today, and that was the environment back then. So to tell the people you have to take care of your orphans and your widows and your aliens, your strangers, was a huge step in that evolution, one which we have now forgotten in many places in the world, including our own. But that this is all part of that progression, and I think it's very valid what Sophie was saying about how our society has separated us so much that religion is not really part of daily life, and that is very true, and it is possibly the cause of many of our social ills today. And I think that's crucial. Those differences are crucial because it shows how we live or how we should live and how we don't. And what you were saying earlier, Nathan, about some people who are not Christian looking at, or many people who are not Christian looking at Christianity and criticizing our God, I think more than that. I think I hear they criticize us because we have this God who we believe in love, but that's not how we live. And that is the biggest scandal in Christianity. It's not what we do.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of us know that kind of, it's probably cliche now, but I mean I think it's very important. Like that, the quote that's attributed to
Chesterton.
To
Mahatma Gandhi.
Thank you, Gandhi. Thank you. I would be a Christian if not for the Christians.
That's what I was
is that what you were gonna say?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. Definitely. But yeah. I mean, it's very, very important. I think, Mom, you talked about the separation between religion and how we live, today, or what we do on Sunday and what we do the rest of the week. I think there's also a big separation lately, not lately necessarily, but definitely in my lifetime, with all the years that I have, a big separation between like the different parts of our lives. Sophie mentioned, the person that does something and goes to jail, or people that do, like, people don't realize the connection between what they do and the consequences. I think a lot of times we don't realize, people definitely don't realize the connection between what they eat and their own health,
Right.
or the connection between what they think and their own health and all that. The integral nature of who we are, not just physical, but spiritual, emotional, mental beings. And I think that's really kind of damaging us. I think it's really hurting us. And I think just the last thought I have about this whole thing is that we're supposed to have our minds on God. We're supposed to have our hearts on God. We're supposed to be but that's integrally related to what we're actually, right? We can't have our hearts, and this goes back to the whole two commandments, the two most important commandments. We can't have our heart on God if we're actually treating our neighbor horribly. We can't do it. And we can't treat our neighbor well if our hearts aren't on God to whatever extent we're capable of doing that. And so just this idea that, what is it? Was it Yoda? Was it Yoda in Star Wars? That it's probably not Yoda. It was probably someone actually real. But that said, be careful because your thoughts become your words, and your words become your actions, and your actions become your character, and all that kind of stuff. But I think oppositely it works as well. Like your actions become your words, and your words become your thoughts. And so if it's hard to go at it one way, if it's hard to have the thoughts of kindness and love and compassion that kind of bleed into our actions, then maybe we have to just kind of fake it, do the actions anyway. And if you do something long enough, you kind of integrate it into your being, and that becomes your thoughts, and that becomes your heart, and that becomes your character. Anyway, that was my thought on it. But what could we do that? Could we do that thing where we just summarize our thoughts in maybe a sentence or two of what the readings this Sunday are about, as something as a help for us maybe, and for anybody who might be listening?
To me, the readings are about the act of define love as a verb. And instead of just loving with what we say is our heart and with emotions and feelings, which is the easy kind of love, and it's fleeting and it goes away really quickly, the readings this week are about actively choosing love in our everyday lives, in the things that we do and the things that we say and the way that we do them.
I think in the readings, it specifically talks about how God wants us to love, very specifically. And I read the readings to Felicity. I've started reading them to her before because she likes feeling a part of the group.
Nice.
And I asked her what she thought, and her response to me, I asked her what she thought about the reading. She said, well, it makes me think that God wants us to love and to love Him. And that's what God wants. And I'm with her completely. I completely believe with Felicity.
Another thing that I said is how much we should be, He wants to be with us, and how much we should help Him help us stay alive.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Good one.
Um,
Could you repeat that? I could not hear.
you said how much He wants us to love Him, and how much He wants us to
Help him help us stay alive.
Okay. So
Yeah, that's great. That's great. You're totally right, Felicity.
I completely agree with her, and I think the readings are kind of following how He's tried to tell us that over thousands of years in different ways.
Yeah, cool. What about you, Mom?
I think definitely love is the theme, and that is the theme of the entire Bible, and that is God. And I think what I'm getting out of out of the readings is a reminder that love is not confined to my circle. Love is not confined to my family and my friends. My duty to love is to every human being. And as you pointed out earlier, especially to those in the margins, especially to those who are oppressed, especially to those who are weak and voiceless. And that is a very heavy obligation, and yet it is what actually gives us life.
Yeah. So basically, getting back to what Felicity was saying, help us, help you, let us help you, help us stay alive. Yeah, that's awesome. And
Felicity.
and my summary would just be, um, basically what I'm taking away from it is just the two commandments: love God, love your neighbor. But not just those two commandments, but how they're connected, and that you can't do one without the other. And you can approach them from either side. You can approach loving God through loving your neighbor. You can approach loving your neighbor through loving God. As long as it's sincere, I think both of them will happen. So that's kind of my takeaway from it. So I think we'll end it there, and I'll say goodnight and say goodnight. I'll say goodbye and press the little button that stops this broadcast, and then I'll say bye to you guys for real. So thank you very much for joining, and see you
Thanks
next
for having us.
week. Yeah. Bye.